The secret room. Laura ran out of her room and almost collided with Bert at the top of the stairs. "Someone was hiding out by the road," she whispered. "I saw him run after Joel." "I'm not surprised," said Bert calmly. "And you don't need to whisper. No one's in the house but Martin and the two of us." Laura shook his arm. "Don't you understand? If you take the shortcut through the woods, you might be able to catch up with Joel and warn him." Bert went into his room and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Don't worry. If someone's following Joel, he knows it. He doesn't miss a thing." Bert kicked off his slippers and stretched out on his back. Laura looked down at her brother, amazed at his indifference. "You're a mighty poor friend, Bert Eastman. Joel may be fighting for his life this very instant." "I'd be a worse friend if I followed him." Bert raised on one elbow and scowled at Laura. "If those slave hunters saw me coming through the woods after Joel, they'd know we were up to something. Next thing, they'd come back here and tear this house apart until they found Martin." "You care more about that darky than you do about Joel. I declare, you must be touched in the head." In the dim light, Bert's face was an unfamiliar mask with shadows where his eyes should be. "I forgot what it was like to have a big sister bossing me around," he remarked. "Can't say I enjoy it." He turned onto his side with his back to her. Laura drew in a quick breath. It didn't seem possible this was her young brother talking so impudently. "You won't have me bossing you around much longer." To her annoyance, she heard her voice quaver. "Just as soon as I can, I'm going back where I'm wanted. Uncle Jim and Aunt Ruth begged me to stay." She whirled around and walked swiftly to her room, closing her door firmly behind her. Tears of hurt and anger filled her eyes, but she rubbed them away with her arm. She refused to cry over Bert or Joel Todd either. Laura awakened to a sound of tapping. Tapping again. In a half-daze, she thought, "Oh, not another runaway." Then as her senses cleared, she realized the tapping was on her own door. She sat up, pulling the bedclothes up to her chin. The door inched open and Bert poked his head through the opening. "Good morning," he said, coming into the middle of the room. For a moment he was silent, shifting from one foot to the other. Then he said awkwardly, "I'm sorry I snapped at you last night about being bossy." Laura leaned back against the headboard of the bed and replied stiffly, "That's all right." She glanced up at him, noticing with surprise how the sunlight shone on the light fuzz on his upper lip. Her little brother was gone forever. It wouldn't be long before he would be shaving, though he was only 13. Already he was broader in the shoulders and taller than she was. Suddenly, seeing him standing there, she was reminded of the time long ago when, having misbehaved at the supper table, she had been sent to her room with her meal only half finished. Bert had come up that night bringing a smuggled cookie and had sprawled companionably on the floor beside the rocking chair where she sat in lonely misery. "We had applesauce too," he said, "but I couldn't save any of that for you. I couldn't put that in my pocket." With her mouth full of cookie, she asked, "Is this yours?" "Yes." She held out what remained. "Here, you didn't have to do that." He shook his head. "You eat it." That's the way it had been between them. She had once heard her father comment, "Bert and Laura may quarrel, but as soon as one of them's in trouble, they come together, thick as thieves." Now that closeness was gone, and Bert was little more than a tall stranger. Indeed, it scarcely seemed right that he should be in her bedroom. A fragrant scent wafted through her open door. "I smell sausage," she exclaimed. "Have you had breakfast?" Bert grinned. "Not yet. We have a cook this morning. Martin used to be a kitchen boy." Laura reached for her robe at the foot of the bed. "I'll dress and be down shortly." Bert started for the door and then stopped abruptly. "I see you've been looking for the trapdoor," he remarked. "Did you find it?" Laura followed his gaze to the wrinkled carpet. "No, I didn't." Bert knelt and rolled back the carpet. He pointed to a section of bare floor between the bed and the doorway. "There it is." Laura joined him, buttoning her robe. "I looked there and I couldn't find it. Of course, I only had a candle for light." She studied the floorboards. "I still don't see any trapdoor." Crouching, Bert slid his fingers into a small crack. To Laura's amazement, he lifted out an oblong section of the floor, revealing an opening large enough to admit a man's body. "Well, for pity's sake," she said. "Clever, isn't it?" Bert looked pleased at her surprise. We didn't want a ring or handle that would show. Hinges would be a giveaway too, so we got this idea. This section rests on a frame that holds it up, and nobody notices this little room from downstairs because the hall closet is under it. We just lowered the ceiling in the closet. Laura peered into the hole at the coffin-like chamber below. It was only 3 or 4 feet deep. A person couldn't stand in it, and it was wide enough for only 1 or 2 people. How long do they hide in there? She asked. All day, sometimes longer. I should think they'd suffocate. We drilled holes along the sides, see? She shuddered. It must be dark at night when you put the cover on. I'd hate to stay in there. A person couldn't even read to pass the time away. Of course, she added, your fugitives can't read anyway. Usually they can't, but Martin can. Nonsense. Did he tell you that? Yes, said Bert, and besides, he read to me from a newspaper. He replaced the trapdoor. Hurry up, Martin must be starved. He's been up for over an hour. He got the fire going and took a bath before I even went down. He doesn't have to wait for me, Laura said, with a return of yesterday's annoyance. She realized, too, that her head was aching. No wonder, with the little bit of sleep she'd had the night before. He won't eat before we do, answered Bert. If you'd get out, I could dress, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Martin looked like a different boy this morning, Laura found, clean and wearing a pair of Bert's outgrown pants and one of his old shirts. He was presiding at the cook stove. 3 pancakes were browning on the griddle, and on Laura's arrival, he removed crisp sausages from a pan at the rear of the stove and placed them on a platter. Morning, Miss Laura, he greeted her, ducking his head shyly. Breakfast ready? Come on, you sit down with us, Martin, urged Bert. Martin shook his head. I'll eat by the stove where I can turn the griddle cakes, he answered. Laura knew that he was not accustomed to sitting down with white people. She had been surprised when he had consented to sit at the table with her, Joel and Bert, the night before. Uncle Jim's slaves always ate by themselves. Probably last night he had been too tired and hungry to object. It's awfully dark in here, she remarked. Why don't you open the curtains? A lighted lamp glowing in the middle of the table made a small area of light in the dimness. She briskly pulled back the curtains, letting in a flood of sunlight. There, that's better. Silence was her only answer, and she became aware that the 2 boys were looking at each other and that Martin had backed against the wall behind the stove. Oh, she said, you're afraid someone will look in the window and see Martin. That's right, Bert agreed. But a covered window in the daytime really looks suspicious, she pointed out. Bert nodded to Martin. She's right. He turned down the lamp and, leaning over, blew it out. Slowly, Martin returned to the stove, but Laura noticed he kept his eyes warily on the window. Eating the delicious pancakes and sausage, with Martin hovering nearby, ready for a fresh serving, made Laura feel as if she were back in Virginia at Aunt Ruth's. She relaxed and almost forgot the danger that hung over all of them. With a spoon, she caught a trickle of maple syrup that was running from the spout of the pewter pitcher. Absently, she licked the spoon, savoring the sweetness. Maple syrup was so much tastier than molasses, she thought. How long it had been since she had helped Pa at the sugaring off. That was always such fun, stirring the sap in the big kettles early in the spring when the snow was still on the ground. But she wouldn't be here for that. Long before spring, she'd be back in Virginia. Martin, she said, I hear you know how to read. Yes, miss, my pappy taught me. I can write too, but spelling gives me some... Laura looked up, wondering why Martin didn't finish what he was saying. She saw that his eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on the window. Instantly, Laura guessed what had happened. He had seen someone outside. No one was in sight now, but a sharp knock sounded on the back door.